Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, December 6th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Cotton Bowl game against Missouri in 23 days. The game against Michigan in 360 days. Today, though, we are talking big picture because there was some big news that came out on Tuesday. NCAA President Charlie Baker announced there was a leaked proposal, I guess, from NCAA President Charlie Baker about the future of the top level of football in the college realm, and it could look very different than it does right now. I'm joined today by Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. And Tony, I guess this is the kind of thing that I think you and I and, anytime two or more sports writers are gathered, they will have the conversation about the future of college football and what it might look like and a potential breakaway of the top division and all that kind of stuff. That's not really the newsworthy part of this. The newsworthy part of this is the NCAA president has put this on paper and sent it out to the schools as hey, maybe we should look at doing this.
Yeah, the NCAA president has done something. And wow, that is news in itself. The release should just be, hey guys, I did something. And aren't I so much different than the previous guy? And that is really as you said, the biggest news in this, that they're actually moving forward, trying to be, I can't call it proactive, but pro-retroactive. Is that a word? Because obviously there are things happening with, antitrust and employment status and things like that. And so they are taking steps to be forward. I think in the article and the release talking about being forward thinking. And this is what that is. And there's a bunch of thinking involved for once.
There is a bunch of thinking involved. And, by the NCAA standards, this is like super proactive because they have not already lost a U.S. Supreme Court case 9-0 on these matters before they even remotely consider changing any rules. The proposal that Baker put forward is, I'm just going to read from the Yahoo article because I know everyone loves it when I read from stuff on the show. Schools that choose to be part of a new subdivision that can opt in or out are required to meet a strict minimum standard rooted in athlete investment. Members of the new subdivision will be permitted to strike name, image, and likeness deals with their own athletes, a significant move away from the current NIL structure. However, the most impactful benefit of this new model is a framework in which schools can directly compensate athletes through a trust fund. Schools within the new subdivision will be required to distribute to athletes thousands of dollars in additional educational-related funds without limitation. There is no cap on the amount of funds that a program can provide an athlete. So I'm going to just sort of translate for you. You can join this club, but there is a substantial annual fee. And that is going to be what determines, this is not you have to have a certain winning percentage to be in the top group here, or you have to have, a certain number of years in a major conference. It is, would you like to pay a certain amount of money? It is $30,000 per year per athlete into what is termed a, quote, enhanced educational trust fund, unquote, for at least half of your school's countable athletes. That is the bare minimum you've got to do. If you have, if a school has, 400 people, they're going to have to put $30,000 in each year per athlete for half of the athletes in their school. On average, the article said it could cost about $6 million a year just for the bare minimum. That's like the table stakes to get in. $6 million probably not a lot to Ohio State, Tony, but that does feel like you're probably really dividing, what should probably be divided, because it really is, Ohio State, pretending that Ohio State and Louisiana Monroe are playing the same sport at the same level is obviously not true. That's kind of how it's presented right now. It has not been true at any point really during the course of the NCAA's existence. But it does feel like this is where you're going to sort of have the, it's not necessarily the on-field haves and have-nots, but it's sort of the financial haves and have-nots is where this is potentially going to split.
Yeah, and you can have anybody come in and join the table if they can afford it. And so it is interesting in that way where we assume it's just going to be the power of the Power Five. We can get into who exactly that's going to be later on. But if somebody else has been like SMU, moving to the ACC, wanting to be involved, obviously there's some money in Texas. They, maybe they will be one of the ones. One question I do have is, why do they say 30,000 for at least for half? Why not just say 15 for everybody? There's just cut the math out in that way, at least 15 for everybody. And then you don't have to do all of the division. But for a place like Ohio State, with roughly Ohio State's always touting over 1,000 athletes, you're talking like $15 million into that fund every year. It's a lot of money, but it's there. They bring in a lot of money. That is 2 home gates for the football season, basically. So, they have that money, but it is certainly a sea change in terms of compensating, the idea of it's open now. If it is we've talking about pay for play with NIL, this is pay to play. If you want in, come on in. It's going to cost you, and we don't want to hear any belly aching about it. And so it's very interesting, and how quickly this moves, we'll see, but you don't move without a first step.
I wonder how this is going to impact non-rev sports, Olympic sports, whatever you want to call it, because according to the proposal, schools do have to continue to live by the framework of Title IX. So 50% of the investment of the money that they put in. So for Ohio State, the $15 million, 50% of it has to go towards female athletes under the Title IX framework. You wonder if is this going to lead to a bunch of, Ohio State has 35 sports. There are, a couple of years ago when Ohio State was playing Clemson, I think the conversation was about the fact that Clemson sponsored like 18 sports, and they're both at the same, the top level of the Division I. You wonder how this is going to impact other sports. Are they going to, are you going to have teams just, we don't need a track team anymore, and you cut the men's team and the women's team, and then it's not a Title IX issue, but you're kind of paring down your payrolls and your student potential educational trust payrolls, or however you want to frame it. It'll be interesting to see how that's impacted. I would assume this probably means less money for extremely expensive coaching staffs, extremely expensive locker rooms, extremely expensive slides and waterfalls in football facilities, that kind of stuff. It is, some of that is more discretionary than other pieces of spending. It has felt for a long time like a lot of big college football programs are kind of in, they're basically in Brewster's Millions mode. Like, well, we have to spend it somehow. We can't have, we're not for profit, so we can't have a profit. So we have to spend it somehow. So, okay, let's put in another waterfall. You're going to have some of that stuff, but it does feel like this could have a negative impact. It's going to be a positive impact for the athletes who are getting the money. It could have a negative impact, though, on some of the other athletes who might see their sports cut.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because already with non-rev sports, you have, I don't know what is like 11 or 13 scholarships for an entire baseball team, and you've got to split that stuff up, and sports like that where not everybody's getting a full share. And Ohio State has always been one of those that we want to, they're saying this, we want to be able to field as many programs, as many teams as possible. When the COVID thing hit and everybody was getting extra COVID years, some schools are saying, no, we're not giving anybody extra COVID years. Ohio State has said, we're going to give everybody extra COVID years. There's this pride that Gene Smith has had throughout this about keeping things going, being a full athletic department. Gene Smith tweeted out support of this plan. It's been similar to a plan that he has shared with people, but he's also on his way out. So you wonder, the next athletic director, when they're going to see all of this, and they're going to see $15 million. And why are we, 36, 35 sports and Alabama has 16 or 17 when you start looking at in those terms? And, you can't, I don't think, Tom, you don't want to talk about competing athletic departments and only focus on football, but football is everything. And you can't, do you get rid of 4 sports to compete with Alabama football? And that seems like not collegiate. That's not a university thing. That is a professional thing. And we can all operate under the guise of this is still amateurism. And that's actually part of the whole argument going on as well. But you're asking a lot to not lose any sports. And Ohio State may keep everybody. Not every school is going to keep all of these sports if they're going to do this. And that's going to have to be something that they think really, really hard on. And I also wonder, Tom, will, because you can have teams in the same conference not opt in and some opt out. How many of the Big Ten, how many of the major of the power, and the article continues to talk about Power Four because the Pac-12 is gone. How many teams in the Power Four won't be opting in? And is that table stakes to be in a conference of the Big Ten, the SEC? You have to opt in. And if you're not going to opt in, we're going to opt you out. Is this going to impact what the conferences look like?
Yeah, that's certainly one way to approach the question. And I think that's a very reasonable way to approach the question, because you have already sort of seen you've gone from a Power 5 to a Power 4. Really, though, it's kind of a Power 2. You look at the amount that the Big Ten and the SEC are bringing in TV revenue starting next year. You look at compared to the Big 12 and the ACC, and it's multiple, it's like 3x and, give or take, versus what the smaller conferences are bringing in. And then if you look at the NCAA, there's not a guarantee the NCAA is the governing body here for the sport of college football, because the NCAA is facing a bunch of court stuff that is not court stuff. That's a very technical legal term. There are several lawsuits facing the NCAA. You go back to the Alston case a couple of years ago. That was a relatively minor one. The O'Bannon case a few years before that. I mean, there's a bunch of that stuff that sort of chipped away at the NCAA and the NCAA's power. There's a bunch of stuff now. House v. NCAA is one of them, looking for as much as $3 billion with a B in retroactive NIL and broadcast revenue payments from people who are going, well, you're doing NIL now because you were told you had to do NIL. So, why didn't I get my NIL back then? It's because you violated my rights. And there are several cases along those lines that, the NCAA may not be able to be a viable ongoing entity at some point. So, do they shift it like, oh, that was our old LLC, and now Ohio State football is under MCAA. Sorry, you have to X that out. Sorry, XCAA football, and it's a new LLC. Sorry, we don't have anything to do with the old one. Yeah, I am not a law talking guy, so I don't know exactly how viable that is in terms of legal strategy, but I'm not super confident the NCAA is going to continue being an ongoing entity, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. There's no timetable on this proposal. Like, it's sort of thrown out there, and I think it's a starting point for the conversation. So, this is not necessarily, hey, this is all going to happen next year. Things have been moving pretty fast in the NCAA world. I have sort of always assumed that there would be some kind of a breakaway at some point in the 2030s when all the TV contracts were kind of up more or less at the same time. That's sort of the timetable I've always sort of been assuming this might happen on. In your mind, does this expedite the process of that happening? Does that make this more likely to happen before the 2030s? Is this an interim step between here and the 2030s? How do you see that maybe shaking out?
I think this is showing Congress and the government like, hey, look, we're doing something. We're trying to fix the issue. Just give us a little help, give us a little time, something like that. And I do think all you need to know about how messed up the NCAA is you've got a politician that comes in and is able to maybe save it. That's how bad things were. You get to turn to Charlie Baker, former Massachusetts governor, and you're like, please, Mr. Politician, help us out of this jam. And, obviously there is going to be a lot of politics involved in getting this done, but this is a logical step, a tip of the cap, like an acknowledgement that yes, things need to change. These are what we want to do. These are things that we think will help. Now, just give us a little bit of a hand in terms of the employment status and things, keeping things. These are student athletes, not employees, and how all of that shakes out. That's going to be something else that comes in. But I do think this moves up the clock. Now, I don't know what it does. Does this throw everything into the lurch in terms of these contracts? I wonder what kind of fine print there was in terms of anything like this happening with those contracts. Like if something earth shattering should happen. And we've talked in the past, I wonder about at some point, do these 50 schools or whatever it is then have their own contract with whatever networks, like, and that's how things operate. So there's still obviously so much to happen. And this is the first, it's a pretty big step, but we'll see where it goes from here and how long it takes for the next step to happen. But it sure doesn't seem to me like 2031 or whenever the contracts are up is when this will finally take place.
Yeah, this is probably not the final form of what this is going to end up looking like, but just the fact that this got put out as a first, a sort of first offer, it's like you're selling your house, and you're probably not on the final. The negotiation is not done, but the first piece of paper they slid across the table had a much bigger number on it than you were expecting. And it was like, oh, okay, well, this probably will not be as long and arduous a process as you might have thought. So we will see how long and arduous the process is, but it's certainly, yet another one of these monumental days in the history of college football that seem to be happening faster and faster and more frequently over the last 3 or 4 years or so. Ever since I started doing a morning show, everything seems to be happening. Really, really big, consequential stuff seems to be happening more and more frequently. Probably just a coincidence. Couldn't tell you for sure, but we will continue doing this morning show. We will continue doing the Buckeye Weekly podcast. We'll continue doing all of the shows you have come to know and love at BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. We'll try not to cause the universe to spin too fast, or the college football universe to spin too fast and throw itself out of orbit or something like that. But we'll be covering the Buckeyes as they head to the Cotton Bowl. Tony, Kevin, and I have our flights booked. We will find out together probably in the coming days and weeks how many of the members of Ohio State's football team a few weeks ago will be joining us there in Dallas. No, as of right now, no further transfer portal entries after the ones that Tony and I broke down on yesterday's show. So we'll see if that craziness has maybe settled down. We'll have to see how the opt-out thing goes. Marvin Harrison headed to New York for the Heisman this weekend. Lots of stuff to talk about. A 5-star defense or offensive lineman making a decision. Ohio State considered a strong contender to land his services. Jordan Seaton. Early signing day coming up on December 20th. Boy, oh boy, is there a lot of stuff going on right now at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So if you want to stay up to date with all of it, you can join us there. And of course, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle as well. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.